Hi, I'm Callie and welcome to Kapowski Reads, and this is my Reading Scottish September wrap-up, which is a little bit different because this month was the Bloody Scotland Festival, which is a festival that takes place every year to basically celebrate Scottish crime fiction. And this month I decided that I was going to read all of the nominees for the debut prize. So I read 5 debut Scottish crime fiction novels, and that's what I'm going to talk about. Also, the prize for the winner of the debut award is getting announced later this evening. Today's Thursday that I'm filming, so I am going to watch the authors do a little talk and then I'm going to wait for the award to be announced. And I'm also going to try and predict the winner, which is basically just me saying what my favourite one was and see if I'm right. So I'm going to talk about the books and then I will come back in a couple of hours and let you know if I was right with who won, and if not, who won. So first up, I'm going to talk about Hear No Evil by Sarah Smith. This is a book that I borrowed from the library, so I don't have my own physical copy, but I would like to get one because I really enjoyed the book. And this book was inspired by a true life case surrounding Jean, a deaf woman who was arrested because she was seen throwing her baby into the river off of a bridge. And so she is arrested and taken from Glasgow through to Edinburgh. But the issue is that nobody can communicate with her and she can't communicate with them because she is deaf and she's non-verbal, and none of the people there know any sort of sign language. So they call in Robert Kinnaborough, and he works at a school for the deaf and non-verbal, and he is able to communicate with Jean. He starts to get quite interested in the case and ends up investigating the case. Even though he's an interpreter, he's not supposed to be investigating it. He tries to find out what really happened. And I really enjoyed this book. It was not a chirpy read by any means. I really liked Jean. I thought she was a very endearing character, and I really liked that sort of a voice was given to this real person, because as so often happens with women in history, a lot of things get erased. So I really liked that her story was included in a sort of fictional way, but I really liked that it made me want to find out more about what happened. I thought it was so interesting a topic as well. I really liked Jean as a character, and I really liked a lot of the women in this book. The working class women in this book, I must say. I hated all of the sort of upper echelons of male society in this book. They were all awful, and I think that was probably quite accurate for the time. So while I didn't like them, no lies were given. So I think that I was meant to dislike them, and I did. I liked Robert at times, but a lot of the time he kind of annoyed me because of his attitude towards Jean being a working class woman who had children outside of wedlock. His attitude was very of the time. So I think his character felt historically accurate, but annoying because, well, it was historically accurate, but that doesn't mean that the attitude was right. So that kind of annoyed me, but I think it was meant to, because I think if he was very sympathetic to her sort of standing, if you like, in life, then it wouldn't have felt real and it would have felt very much like a piece of fiction, whereas the whole book felt like it could have been real. And I know it wasn't, it was a work of fiction, but I think that it was sort of respectfully written so that I feel like Jean's name's not being tarnished or anything. I think it was a very interesting book, and it was utterly heartbreaking. It broke my wee heart. Even though it was inspired by a true life case, I didn't know the case of Jean Campbell. So I didn't know what was going to happen. And I know I could have just looked it up online, but I kind of liked reading the book not knowing whether she was found guilty or not, I just felt so hooked, and it felt so tense because I was just so worried that she wasn't going to get a fair trial, or that people just weren't going to be able to understand her. And the options she had were basically go to trial, be found guilty and hanged, or go to an asylum. This book took place in the Victorian times. Neither of those options sounded good. So I just found myself utterly hooked and just hoping for the best for Jean. The next book was Wolf Hunters by Amanda Mitchison, and I do own this book. This one. This book is set in a futuristic Scotland after a pandemic has happened and Scotland has cut themselves off of the rest of the UK. The church has taken control of the state, and this book is all about a landowner who has fenced off his entire estate and shipped in wild animals. So bears, wolves, wildcats. And then an inspector is called in because a body has shown up, and the body appears to have been attacked by a bear. But the bear in question is super friendly and lovely. So it starts to look a little bit suspicious. Things are not quite as they seem. I really like that this book was set in a sort of post-pandemic world, because I haven't read that many books that feature a pandemic. And I mean, we've just lived through / are still living through one. So that was quite unusual, even though the author has said that she started writing this before the coronavirus pandemic. So while there is a pandemic, it's not that one. So that was interesting. And I just found the book to be very sort of dark. Obviously it was dark. There were people being attacked by animals, but it just felt so creepy with that big estate being cut off from the rest of society. And the society was very kind of almost Scotland does Mad Max. It was pretty, there were police, but it felt lawless at times. There were a lot of things going on that just were a bit shocking. I thought that the main character, Rona, not our pandemic, but still got Rona in this book, she was an awful character. She was awful. She was drinking all the time. She was not following procedure. But I liked that even though this world was ruled by the church and was very sort of puritanical, she was still an inspector. And I haven't read a lot of books that sort of feature almost sort of a dystopian society that has women in positions of power. So I really liked that. The whole sort of vibe of this book was just pretty depressing, because it almost felt like there was absolutely no hope and no joy in the world, because I suppose there wasn't. I liked that Rona just did not back down. She was convinced there was something going on, and she was convinced she was going to look into it. The rest of the police force seemed absolutely useless, but it still annoyed me that she kept going off and doing things without having a buddy. You always take a buddy with you, especially if you're going in the woods. I felt like this book involved a lot of stupid decisions being made, and that kind of annoyed me a bit. I didn't overly enjoy the first sort of 50 pages and the last 50 pages of the book that much. The ending sort of infuriated me quite a lot, but I can't tell you what happened because that will be a spoiler. But I think if you read it, you would guess what was going to happen, because I felt like it was really obvious. And while it was an enjoyable sort of climax of the story, I felt like so many clues had been given that I wasn't excited when it happened, because I thought, well, yeah, of course that's what's going to happen. Rona seemed to be the last person to realise that. I realised it first. Well, before her anyway. I thought there were a lot of little clever little hints in the book, but ultimately I found it to be a little bit predictable, so didn't overly love it. I liked it. I liked it as a friend. I would have liked to have known a little bit more about the, I want to say world building, about what had happened to result in Scotland cutting themselves off of the rest of the UK, And also Rona had just returned from investigating the murder of her sister. So it sort of felt like that story was really, really important. But none of it was featured in the book. So I would quite have liked a little bit of a prologue, like an origin story. I just felt I needed to know a bit more about what had happened prior to the book so that I could really understand her character a bit and sort of understand the rules of the world that we were in, because it was kind of Scotland, but it very much wasn't. So I would have liked a bit more. Next up was Welcome to Cooper by Tariq Ashkanani. And this book, controversially, does not take place in Scotland. So Scottish crime, but it takes place in Nebraska in the US. And the author has described this book as an American noir crime story. It takes place in a fictional quiet little town in Nebraska where Detective Levine has basically been banished to because he has messed with the wrong person and been punished and sent off to the middle of nowhere. On his first day, he is called in to a murder. A young woman has been found dead and he needs to find out what happened. This book was filled with corruption, crime, organized crime, and it was full of unlikable characters. The main character, Levine, is a terrible, terrible policeman. He is awful. There's no sort of grey area of like, oh, maybe he's not that bad. No, he's awful. I couldn't find any redeeming characteristics in this man. He was awful. All of the police in this book were awful. I really liked the bartender, who was just a sweet woman who was basically the bartender in every single TV show, film, book set in a sleepy town with a bartender with a heart of gold. That was her, and I loved her. There was a serial killer as well, which I found to be very, very interesting, and the book had dual narratives. So it sort of walked through what was happening at the time, current day, but also there were sections that were basically from the criminal's point of view. Now I say criminal because the police were also criminals in this book, but the murdery criminal got a point of view as well. And I find that to be really interesting because I was trying to find out who they were, and I kept trying to sort of put together the clues that were left to try and determine who that point of view was coming from. I do enjoy a book that's got a sort of like serial killer storyline that ends up sort of growing arms and legs, and I found that to be quite exciting. But there were a lot of unanswered questions that I had. I felt like I was given lots of clues to things and then nothing came of it. So I sort of felt like this book felt almost unfinished, as if it was perhaps, maybe it is part of a sequel, and the sequel will answer my questions, I think. The next one was The Girl, the Crow, the Writer and the Fighter by George Paterson. And this book was all about a young woman, a waitress, who is in receipt of an inheritance, and she receives a pile of letters written by a controversial author, Henry Miller, which may lead to a missing religious artifact, basically. And this is quite a chunky book. It was almost 400 pages, and it takes place across decades and sort of splits between action sequences and the letters that May has received. This is another book that is in the Scottish crime debut fiction shortlist that was not taking place in Scotland. All of the books were written by Scottish authors though, so that's the qualifier. First of all, I was a little bit confused because I didn't know who Henry Miller was. I know who Arthur Miller was, and in my brain this was about Arthur Miller, and that is not right. So that was on me. I found it to be quite slow, and there were a lot of periods where it just felt like nothing was happening. I did like the sassy librarian character. I thought she was fun. She sort of felt a little bit more developed as a character than the others. The rest of the characters, I just felt like they were there. They were very one-dimensional and quite flat, so I just didn't feel anything towards them. There was a lot of adventure going on, but the book took a really long time to actually give me the stakes. So lots of things were happening, but it was a lot of, well, why? Why is this happening? What is the point in this? And it was, yeah, I think that if I wasn't reading this book, especially for the debut prize sort of reading challenge that I set for myself, that I probably would have DNF'd it. And I think I probably should have, because I could have read something I enjoyed instead. Lesson learned. And the last book was Meantime by Frankie Boyle. And this book is all about Felix, who is a Valium addicted man whose best friend Marina has been murdered, and he decides that he is going to investigate her murder. And he puts together just a ragtag team of pals, which are made up of a political activist, a crime author, a failed screenwriter, and they start looking into Marina's murder. And oh, they find out a lot. I found this book to be utterly compelling. I didn't want to put it down, which I think is always a sign of a good book. I wanted to keep reading it, and I really did enjoy it. I found Felix to be quite a tragic main character. I don't think he was likeable, but I suppose he was a loyal friend. But he had a lot of issues, and there were a lot of times that he was taking a lot of drugs, and I sort of wondered how much of this is even happening. I was so sure that I was going to find out that it was all happening in his head and none of this had gone on. So that was really fun to try and work out what was real. I did not expect this book to involve Cthulhu-inspired Burns poems, and yet there were. That's something I never thought I needed in my life, but I got it from this book. And it was so strange. There were a lot of very strange moments in this book. And I think that that's just because the characters were so strange. But I enjoyed the characters. They all felt different, like they could be real. And they were flawed. Oh, they were flawed. Lots of flaws. But they were also quite likeable. Like, I wanted good things to happen to them. I didn't want bad things to happen to any of the characters, so I found myself really rooting for them. And even though Marina was dead when the book started, I found myself really liking her because her friends seemed really likeable, so I assumed that she would have been likeable too. It was a very, very wild ride of a book, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I did not guess anything, and I don't think that, I mean, how could you? There was so much going on, and I suppose if you were to take notes and try and piece bits together, you could have maybe predicted some stuff that was going to happen, but there was so much that it was kind of hard trying to work out the red herrings and the useful facts. There was far too much going on that I just couldn't work out where the book was going, and I had to just keep reading it to find out. My favourite of the 5 would be Meantime by Frankie Boyle. If I was picking a winner, I would pick that one. I will be interested to see how the author chat goes and interested to see who wins. So I will come back and let you know if I was right. So the author's chat was so fun. They all seemed absolutely lovely, and they're all working on new stuff. So that's exciting. More new Scottish fiction coming out soon, hopefully. The winner of the debut prize was Welcome to Cooper by Tariq Ashkanani. So huge well done to him there. Once again, I am no psychic. If you read any of these books, I would love to know how you got on with them, or if you want to pick any of them up, do let me know in the comments. I would love to know how you get on with them. Thank you for watching. Bye!